Let us begin the second to last session. Just kidding, last session. We are going to talk about the very hot and potentially very profitable world of esports from two different perspectives. So let me introduce first. I'll introduce both Mia and Scott. And then they'll go in that order. Professor Mia Consalvo of Concordia University. She is the Canada Research Chair in Game Studies and Design. I inquired, there is actually no physical chair that's given. And she's going to talk to us about her research in e-gaming, live streaming, which has been going on for quite a number of years. So that is going to be exciting. And then Scott Kelly, who's a partner in Witkoff and... Banner and Witkoff. Sorry, I totally messed that up. In Washington, D.C. I've known Scott for a couple of years, and I guess I relate to him in a particular way because Scott is kind of in the midst of his inner academic coming out, which I can assure you will eventually take over your life, as it has mine. And he's going to talk about copyright and keystrokes and has done some very novel and interesting work. So over to Mia.
And thank you to the organizers for inviting me here. I do not have a law background at all. I come from media studies, so feel free to argue with me about anything from your perspective. I'm going to be talking mainly about Twitch and what's going on in that space. But first, I need to thank my 3 research assistants who've done an incredible amount of work. I told them, I'm paying you to watch people playing other video games. And they were all like, yes. So Mark, Marilyn, and Andre, many of the insights that I'm going to share with you are gained directly from them. And also, as they are younger from me, they're more native position as a Twitch person where they could explain to me some of the finer points of the streamer culture. And just a little bit of an overview of my talk. I'm going to tell you a brief bit about the larger research project I'm working on. I'm focusing mainly on why and how streaming happens, so the range of motivations and stream characteristics. And then really quickly at the end, just some of the past work I've already done on Twitch relating to how failure gets enacted in gameplay, toxicity online, and disability in the body. And then a few issues to consider that I'm curious about with Twitch and its implications, such as precarious labor, community management, bots, and standards and practices. So this is part of a larger project I started a year and a half ago now called Streaming at the Margins of Play, where I was interested in identifying and documenting contributions from Twitch TV streamers who fall outside the company's targeted demographic. And this is because a lot of the early research that we have about live streaming, and Twitch is the predominant platform, I should say, in North America. There are other platforms, especially in Japan and China, but Twitch is the one that most people talk about in the West. But the primary focus has been on esports, and especially young men who play esports. And I was worried that some of our initial theories about play and what was going on would focus on them to the exclusion of other voices, and there are other voices in there. And so it was consciously to bring them into the theorizing. And in particular, I kind of move away, I'm sorry, from esports a bit onto variety streamers. And I'll talk about that more in a second. How many of you have watched a live stream on Twitch? Pretty good. How many of you have yourselves live streamed on Twitch? Excellent. Okay. I'm a micro streamer. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. So just to give you a little bit of background, Twitch started as Justin TV in 2006, 2007, so it has been around for more than a decade. It was originally a live streaming service where you could stream anything that you wanted, and people did. But as it turns out, the game section was the most popular, and it kind of broke away as Twitch in 2011. Justin TV itself ceased operations in 2014. Kind of though as an extended revenge or karma, now the in real life channel on Twitch is surging in popularity, so you can list yourself as, like social eating is a category, but more often people do things like they draw art or animation, they'll program and they'll talk to you while they're doing it. So Justin itself shut down in 2014. Twitch was sold to Amazon for a lot of money, and in 2014 it was the 4th largest driver of internet traffic in the US, just because of all the bandwidth that it takes to stream video games. And there's pages and pages of literature. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things regarding Twitch. So one of the earliest papers tried to look at what are the main communities involved in streaming on Twitch. And of course, esports was at that time the most dominant. And then they called them Let's Players, so coming off of YouTube and people like PewDiePie playing lots of different types of games. Now we call them variety streamers. And there was also a significant focus on speedrunners, so people playing through a video game trying to play it as fast as they possibly can. And those 3 areas are still on Twitch. Like I said, there's the addition of the in real life, but they're still predominant. And then Hamilton, Gerritsen, and Kern talked about live streaming as this 3rd place for fostering participation and community. So it's not just a place where you go to watch a game, but that there's a person playing who's talking with you. There's live chat, so there's a community. Different channels can come to develop their own personalities or flavors. And so there are places where you can participate in a group and feel part of, some group. Now, if you go to Twitch and you look at the games page, it will list for you each of the games in declining popularity with the number of viewers currently watching that game. If I had showed you this from a year or 2 ago, it would have looked very different. For the longest time, I would say the top 4 spots were dominated by esports. So Dota 2, League of Legends, Hearthstone, Counter-Strike Go, those were pretty much all there. And it's really started to change just in the last year. You'll see right now, Fortnite is number 1, PlayerUnknown Battleground, PUBG is number 2. You see the rise of when a new game comes out, it'll show up and often it'll sink back down. But there's a lot more movement. And I would actually argue that kind of going forward in the future, variety streaming is going to become even more and more important, especially bringing in different groups of people into watching on Twitch. So one question I'm curious about is why are people variety streaming? And I've had, as I said, my research assistants watching. We're just starting the interview phase now, so I'm going to have a better answer to this question in about a year or so, if you want to invite me back. But for now, what we're seeing is people, because they talk all the time on these streams, is a variety of reasons. So especially at the top, in terms of the most views, you have your professionals. These can be esports performers. Some of them are practicing or they're working on their craft. Some of them may have been elite competitors. Now they're not, but they're still very interested in playing the game and they have a significant audience. And so they're looking at Twitch as a new revenue stream for them. There are a fair number of people who came to Twitch from backgrounds in games journalism, games reviewing. They may have had a well-established YouTube channel, so they're very used to performing for a camera. They probably already have, fans or a fan base that they bring along with them. There are some people who have developed that on Twitch itself. There are the pro players, as I mentioned, and then there's also the personalities. So people who may not necessarily be esports people, but have gone up in popularity. A, they've been doing it for a while and gotten good at it, and B, they have a specific persona, play style, way of approaching things, community that really attracts lots of people. You have what we call the climbers right now. These are the people who aren't necessarily there yet, but you can tell from their stream and the way that they're conducting themselves, that's kind of where they would like to be. There's the social fun group. These are the people who aren't necessarily on Twitch to become pro, get subscriptions, get a large user base. They're there because they're playing the game, or they're playing the game and four of their friends are tuning in and they're talking to each other while they're playing the game. Either it's multiplayer together or they're playing a single player game and their friends are talking to them in chat. And it's interesting watching some of these streams because it feels a little like you've wandered into a party where you don't know anyone and you're just sort of overhearing these conversations. Some people are experimenting, they're not really sure what they're doing. Maybe they hit the share button on their PS4 and suddenly they're broadcasting, or they don't know what all the hype is about, so they want to give it a shot. And then there's sort of the question marks, especially the people who are streaming to very, very small audiences or even to nobody. And this is where we hope we get more answers from interviews about what it is that they're doing this for and what they hope to get out of it. So if you take all of those people and their streams together, one of the questions that we were thinking about is what differentiates them beyond just the reason for their streaming or maybe the length of time that they've been doing it. And this could be, is it a good stream or a bad stream? But that's really not the right question. It's just what do we see as the variety of things going on? If somebody said, hey, what's going on Twitch? This is our attempt to pick apart what's going on in a live stream. And so this is actually very fresh. We were talking about this topic just last week. My RAs and I, we're still working through it. We're coming up with some descriptors and we're trying to analyze them. So I'd be really interested in Q&A on your thoughts on these, if you think they fit or if there's other things that we have missed. And these are sort of topics or categories that are variable in nature. So for example, with the play itself, we're seeing a range of very expert play at one end of the spectrum, and we'll call it recreational play at the other end. So this is Ann Munition. She's a professional streamer. She usually draws, over 1,000 people. She's not a mega streamer, but she's up there. She exhibits very good gameplay. You see this especially with the ex-pros. They are very elite in their play. You can tell at a glance that they're very good at whatever game it is that they're playing. They move through it easily. They often talk about setting the difficulty on hard. But then you also see people on the more recreational side who screw up a lot. They're laughing at themselves. They may not know what they're doing. And they can be fine with that. But it's not that playing very well is a necessary thing for them to do. It's more maybe about the streaming. So there is this variable quality to play within the streams that we found. The other really important part of Twitch is, and you will find people who will simply turn on their stream and play, and that's it. Like you won't see, here you can see in the top left corner, that's Adam Coble playing, but that's his webcam. So he's constantly talking and you can see him while he's playing. Some people just literally have the game up and they don't say anything. You're like, why is this here? Why aren't you just playing by yourself? So interviews. But many people are involved in critiquing and talking about the game. And it's not just that they're reacting, but it ranges from a very simple reaction, oh my God, I died. Oh, that's so pretty. Far Cry 5 came out a week ago and everyone was like, oh, this game is beautiful, like beautiful, beautiful, over and over again. Or kill it, oh my God. So there's the very reactive sense. And then there's somebody like Adam who is actually doing a fairly deep gameplay analysis. So for example, if his character dies in the game, he will pause to talk about what were the design decisions in the game. Were they good or poor? Is he figuring out how to play the game through making mistakes? And is that pushing him to play better? Or is the game maybe broken in a way because he's trying different things and the game isn't helping him out? And then you even have at the very high level sort of those journalists or reviewers who can almost feel at a time like they're moving through like bulleted points of commenting on different things about the game. This is how the music, sounds. Here's how I feel about the difficulty level. Do the guns react in a certain way? It's like they're checking kind of boxes going down. Production values vary wildly. And I should also point out that, as I said, there's a range. And it's not that the upper end of the range is everything that you see amongst like the most popular streamers. There are exceptions in various categories, and there are deviations. You can have people who are doing everything very well and be like at the very, very low end in terms of like views. So production values means that the streamer got, well, a really nice setup. So maybe they're streaming in HD, which suggests they have a very strong internet connection. They have a really good webcam. They might have a green screen so that you just see them with the game directly behind them rather than the inset camera. They've got a nice mic. This is from Yogs Lamadia's stream. So they may have graphics that are professionally, personally done for them. So this is, when she's on a break, you see this screen come up. And she's also got, like at the bottom for her, excuse me, personal information, similarly themed graphics as well. And people will bring in different things into the game, additional cams, I'll talk about in a minute. Some of them may stream music. They may have a song like In the Still of the Night playing. They probably don't want to do that because then later on the songs are muted and any dialogue that goes along with it is muted out as well. But production values range. We notice differences in the streaming objectives, and we divide these into the micro and the macro. The micro means what are the objectives that the streamer has for that particular stream itself. This is Ratters. She was playing Cuphead when it first came out, which is a pretty hard shooter game. I don't know. I would never play this game because it's a shooter game. And she was having difficulty playing it. Actually, the day that I was watching her, I have video of it, she eventually stopped playing. And she apologized to her stream. She said, I'm sorry, I keep failing at this game. I can't give you the quality of stream that I want to with this game, and so I'm going to switch to something else. It was one of the more explicit, affirmations that I'd heard of streamers, and we've heard this in a couple of the interviews that we've done, how they talk about why they choose the games that they play, what they're thinking about, like do they try and match them to their interests or skill level. So for that stream in particular, she had become aware that there was this mismatch, and she was afraid to drive viewers away, that failure would not be interesting, and so she switched the game so that there would be an enjoyable experience. And then on the more macro side, what are the objectives of the streamer over time? And this could be, excuse me, maybe over the week. This is Sirius Clara. She's kind of mid-level on the left. She'll sometimes do a themed week. So she'll play games that feature water or cats or whatever, strikes her fancy, and, try and pick games along that line. But then also, even more macro, as I mentioned, the different reasons people have for streaming. Are they doing this to make money, to gain more subscribers? Is this a fun part-time gig and that's how they want to keep it? Or are they, trying to do more? Or is this, again, literally just something that they do with their friends and maybe it's nice if other people watch? There can be a persona that's involved with the streamer. And this is different from personality, which I'll get to in a moment. A persona is like a very distinct mask that some streamers wear. Not all of them do. This is Casey Tron on the left. If you know Casey Tron, you know all about her. She, some people call her a boob streamer. She's actually pretty modest there. She has got a well-known reputation. She used to wear more low-cut tops. Now what she does is she invites toxicity into her stream. She does not have the normal rules that most streamers have about don't be a jerk, no sexist language, no this, no that. She just says free speech for everyone. When people predictably hurl abuse at her, she basically hurls it right back at them. She also plays at being like the worst stereotype of a dumb girl gamer who doesn't know what she's doing, all the while talking about what a great girl gamer she is. So she's taunting the audience to go after her. When I was watching her, people could send a donation in and write a text that would appear on the screen when the donation came through, and she would read them aloud. People paid money to insult her, to have the, you can't see it there, but there's an insult that she's reading aloud, insulting herself for money. So that's her persona. Media savvy. We saw a range of, knowledge. This isn't related to the production of the stream, but people's either training or knowledge about how to talk to an audience, how to work with a microphone, how to engage in eye contact. It could also spill over to how are you managing your brand, yourself as a streamer. So you have a schedule, you invite people to watch you, you have rules, you have subscriptions, you make things very easy for people. Then there's personality. As I mentioned, it's a little different from persona, because a personality, everyone has some type of personality associated with them, unless they're really vacillating between different things, and it's hard to pin down. We saw it relating to two elements. First of all, their play style. So are they very methodical? Are they like explorers, Richard Bartle's original types? Are they adventurers? Are they killers? Are they socializers? Maybe they like to screw up the game and see what happens, die repeatedly. Maybe they're very argumentative, or maybe they always like to play on the hardest setting. And then there's their attitude. Are they a very chill person? Maybe they don't talk a lot, but they're very sarcastic. Maybe they're very bubbly and excited. This is Crippled Kenny's opening graphic. Stream begins shortly. Crippled Kenny himself is in a wheelchair, and he talks about that a lot. It's part of his identity, and he makes, he mocks the identity. So he's got the Crippled Kenny, and he's got the graphic of the kid in the wheelchair doing like the wheelie in the circle and flipping up. Streamers also vary with their community interactions. So this is Seriously Clara again. You can't really see it, but across the bottom in very light white, she's got bonding time written. And so a fair number of personality streamers at the beginning of their stream will not play the game. Sometimes it can be an hour before the gameplay actually starts. And they're literally just talking with their chat. Hey, what's going on? I saw this movie. Sometimes they're eating dinner while they're doing it, and they're engaging in conversation. This is, of course, not possible for the people with no people in their chat. Sometimes those people are, talking to another person in the room. And, sometimes they'll show you their dog if their dog runs through. Sometimes they're talking to the screen as if, like they're engaging in a conversation about like how the game's playing, but, they are limited by what they can do. Social media use, people vary quite a bit, in terms of sending out Twitter notifications. Hey, I'm about to start streaming, come watch me. Or, like, here's a clip. Routers will often ask people, like, make a great clip of me playing this game, and I will retweet it to other people. Others have a YouTube channel that they promote. Let's see, I think Casey Tron had a subreddit for a while, but it got banned. So there's different social media use that players can use, or streamers can use. And then there are gimmicks, which can relate possibly to a persona or not. So this is 8-Bit Dylan, and he does Sub Art Sunday, where every Sunday, if you subscribe to his channel, you get, first of all, a special icon which shows that you're a subscriber, and he will pick one of the subscribers who's present, I don't know if it's at random or not, and then they can tell him what they want him to draw. And as long as it's PG rated, he will do that. And then the cam switches to the drawing of the art, and then he will send it to them. So that's like a regular part of his stream. Other people will do more one-off things. So when Sea of Thieves came out 2 weeks ago, lots of people were in pirate hats or had a bandana and saying "arr" a lot. Some people have a special camera set up, not on them, or in addition to them, there's one like on their pet. So often a cat or a dog that's sleeping. Or for a while, there was a rage of people with a heart rate monitor. And you could see on screen they had a running update on what their heart rate was. So there are different gimmicks that people engage in, sometimes to try and gain viewers or gain excitement, to break through. And then there's this issue of embodiment, which is something that we were trying to think through in terms of, some of the problems related to Twitch and the toxicity that's associated with it. Some of it doesn't necessarily get to the point of toxicity, but it can be problematic with Twitch. So for example, because streamers are showing themselves most of the time through a webcam, viewers come in with certain expectations, ideas, presumptions, and often stereotypes about the type of person that they're looking at. This comes out most often with women and, the label girl gamer. Who are you? Are you a girl gamer? Oh, you've got a low-cut shirt. Maybe you're just a boob streamer, so we're not going to take you seriously. It happens a lot with people of color, black men. If they, talk in a certain way, people will say, oh, you're talking black. Why are you doing that? Maybe your stream would be good if you toned down like the ethnicity or something. People with disabilities, they often will call it out themselves. So Kenny here, this is his bio on his page, talks about being in a wheelchair and how that affects his play. Some people, rather than kind of deal with the inevitable questioning, try and get out in front of that. We notice that a lot with streamers with disabilities, where they would have their bio, they would talk on screen. Ratters talked about like having chronic fatigue and how that impacts how long she can play, sometimes how well she can play. But it's something that even if the streamer is, if they're marked in any other way than like young, white, male, somebody's probably eventually going to bring in some discussion of it. So it's how they want to deal with it. Now, I mentioned the different reasons people stream, and we're trying to sort out right now, are there differences like in viewer size, like community size of concurrent views? And we're not entirely finished with this, but this is just our rough breakdown right now of how we see differences. And 8,000 plus, I mean, we've seen streams as 20, 30,000. I think there was a recent concurrent stream out of something, it broke Twitch. But like tens of thousands of viewers. Where this is more akin to, let's say, you go to the stadium to see the super rock band play. And as a community, you were not expected to be called out by the singer on the stage in any way. It's simply being part of the event. And then you go down, the 1,500, the 5, I would say the next 3 are about the same. You have people who are making money, who may or may not be doing it full time. It's hard at the top end to engage with an audience. And as you go down, it gets easier and easier. I'm currently most fascinated with the bottom end of the scale. So the 10 to 100, the micro, these are people that are really, they may get some money, but it's not their full-time job. They are interacting with their audience quite a bit. The 2 to 10 nano, these are the super micro streamers. And my RA jokingly, we were talking about who are the 0 to 1. He's like, those are the no-no streamers because no one's watching them. And we engaged in some self-streaming ourselves as part of this project, and we were the no-no streamers. So we have personal experience of that. Now, regardless, as I mentioned, some people are not in Twitch and streaming to make money, to become famous, but there is this increasing discourse about the space that, you can make a living playing video games, and isn't it wonderful? And, here's how you should do it. Like all those characteristics I mentioned, there are YouTube videos of how you should be doing all those things in particular ways so that you can be that 8,000 plus. And if you can, it's really awesome for you, because it puts you even further ahead of everybody else. You get early access to games. We were curious as researchers, what happens like when a game first comes out, that first day release? Is there gonna be a difference in the stream between the journalist who's played games for years and maybe someone who's just started a few months ago but it really has good skills? Well, first of all, the playing field isn't even equal. The people at the top get the game a week ahead of time. And so they've already been playing it and getting good at it. And the official stream started the day before the release for those people. So the people at the bottom can't even get there. The super streamers get endorsements, free stuff, which they then give away to people on their stream, so they get more views for that. They are in contact often with game developers, with Twitch itself. They hear about changes ahead of time. And also, they get sort of the habitual viewers. People watch Twitch to watch Lyric. They don't go there to like try to find other people. That's just what they do. And I'm kind of running short on time, so I'm going to jump past this. We can go into Q&A. But just to show you some of the past work I've done, As I mentioned, that's Marilyn in the center there. And we did a paper about failure and how failure is enacted in gameplay in interesting ways on Twitch and how communities respond. I did a paper about Caseytron herself and the toxicity and the trolling that happens. And I've done a paper with Roger Altizer on live streaming and disability and how embodiment in Twitch is a really interesting thing to think about, which is one of the emerging issues. So I think there are four. There's precarious labor. These are people who, it's like, basically they're always streaming if they want to make it in Twitch. They're streaming 7 days a week, 10 hours a day. This is very hard, both mentally, emotionally, physically. The people with disabilities really highlight this, but it's all the players in particular who are dealing with that. There's the moderation and safety issue. Caseytron had stalkers for a while. It's hard to call the police and say somebody's stalking me on Twitch, and they're like, what? Right? And how are the companies themselves dealing with this and potential liability? The use of bots is emerging, and continuing, but right now it's very limited. It's like a form of engagement with a community, but also, like some warnings. But bots are evolving in interesting ways. And also, as I mentioned, the community standards. Twitch just revised its community standards and said, I think, you should wear what you wear to a mall. And now there are self-appointed clothing police who show up in women's streams to check that they're not being too revealing. And that's it. Thank you.
Over to you, Scott. Yep.
Great. Well, anyway, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Scott Kelly. I'm very happy to be here back at More Than Just a Game for the third time. And as John mentioned, I came here initially as a practitioner. And if you've been here the last 3 years, I started with very practical topics. I talked about the basics of game cloning, patents, copyrights, trademarks. Then last year it was sort of delving into a bit of the more theoretical virtual reality. What happens when you use a physical hammer in the virtual world? And so now I guess I've gone full bore over into, well, let's talk about an academic topic that may or may not ever result in a lawsuit. So it's an exciting area for me, and I'd love to hear what everybody has to think about it. I'd like to introduce the problem, and then if people have questions or comments, I welcome them. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my co-author, one of our colleagues at Banner and Witkoff, Kirk Sigmund. I talked about this problem with him at length, and we both got really excited about it, and we turned it into a paper that's going to be published in the forthcoming inaugural issue of the Interactive Entertainment Law Review. And so we're really excited about the new journal, and I want to encourage anybody out there who wants to write and be seen in this space to generate submissions and talk to Dr. Mimler or John or Gaetano about just how to get involved and what sort of interesting topics we have. I will do the lawyerly thing and say that the opinions that we have in this presentation, they're mine, and I suppose maybe my co-authors. They're not my firms and they're not my clients. The other thing is I'm a US lawyer, so I'm talking about US law. I understand that European law, UK law, German law might result in extremely different results. So with that, the five sort of topics I'm hitting today, I'm generally talking about whether or not copyright protection is going to extend to esports, well, to input streaming in video games. So we've just heard Mia walk through how in Twitch, you're live streaming video, and that's important because it allows you to add a video of yourself and commentary and certain types of audio and that sort of thing. But she also said that Twitch was the 4th largest consumer of broadband in the United States. Video is expensive. If you look at Twitch, Netflix, and everything else, it's almost 80% of the world's internet bandwidth is going to video. And so one of the ways that game companies have minimized their bandwidth impacts is by, rather than streaming the video output of the game with all the pixels and colors and everything, they can stream the inputs, and you can join using your own game client, and your game will dynamically re-render the scene. And that ends up providing a lot of advantages, particularly if you don't want to pay the hosting bill. So we'll talk today, like I said, when I started with this topic, it felt strictly academic. It felt like there were a lot of easy answers. obviously the game developer has all the rights, and there's going to be contracts that ruin everything. But then it turns out about a month after we submitted the paper, we did see this become a real issue. We saw a third-party league come up and try to shut down unauthorized streamers. Now, Valve stepped in and they said, hey, we are the superior rights owner here. We own the rights in the game. But I think it really highlights that this is an important problem. And the reason why this problem stood out to me was this case from 2 years ago, World Chess versus Chess24, where we saw that third-party leagues, they do see value in protecting the content of their tournaments, and it's what allows them to compete. We'll take a look at how replays and input streaming work, just so that we're all on the same page, and then we'll walk through whether these input streams might be copyright eligible. Are they creative? Are they fixed? Are they original? Then we'll look at the benefits that we might get from recognizing copyright in these streams. So, like I said, first we'll talk about this controversy that I think made this topic a bit more relevant. So there is the Electronic Sports League, ESL. They are one of hundreds of third-party leagues that have sprung up to organize tournaments and leagues around games. So ESL is very popular. They hosted a lot of third-party tournaments for Dota 2. And they entered an exclusive streaming agreement with Facebook, where they agreed that all of their tournaments, all of their players would live stream their games on Facebook and nowhere else. Prior to that agreement, everybody was streaming on Twitch because it's extremely popular. So once they announced this agreement, the fans revolted. They were very upset. A lot of fans would join the tournament games using their own clients, and then they would stream that onto Twitch. And even some of the players would do that, including a relatively famous one, Admiral Bulldog. So you can see sort of the difference in the experience. The fans were convinced that Facebook was offering the inferior experience. So ESL, presumably due to their contractual obligations to Facebook, filed DMCA takedowns against the Twitch streamers, saying, hey, we have a copyright in the tournament content, and you guys are violating that. Now, importantly, the only thing that was being copied was the gameplay content. They weren't copying ESL's video stream. They weren't copying commentary or anything like that. But ESL came up and they said, hey, we have this right. So Valve stepped in and they said, wait a minute, those are our rights. You're operating under our agreement. You can't use our game unless you agree to our terms. And the terms say that we own all the rights in this game, and we're the only people that are going to be able to send these takedown notices. That was sort of the end of this story. ESL has played nice. I think they might be slightly back on Twitch, or at least they're not stopping people from getting on Twitch. But we looked at this and we thought, how is ESL supposed to compete with other third parties that might want to copy this? How do they monetize? How do they make money off of these tournaments if anybody can join in and start broadcasting it on their own? And so one of the conclusions that we reached is we think that there might be a benefit here to recognizing some copyright in the players' inputs that generate this game, and such that it can be assigned to somebody like ESL so that they can capitalize on this content. Now, this topic came to us because of a similar case that occurred in the chess world. Now, obviously, nobody owns the copyright in chess. It's an ancient game. But World Chess would organize these very important chess tournaments. But there are lots of other chess leagues as well. So Chess24, which runs a competing chess website, would send somebody to the World Chess tournaments, and they'd be sitting in the stands, and they'd be emailing back to the home base, okay, in this game it was knight to f4 and then bishop to a3, and Chess24 would plug that into their own custom viewer. And then they would live stream the other guy's tournament on their site and provide their own commentary. So it feels a lot like Chess24 is free riding on a lot of the expense that World Chess puts into organizing their tournaments. So World Chess brought this lawsuit and they said, hey, we have copyright in that. They argued the hot news doctrine, saying this is there's value and we've put great expense into this. And if you followed US law at all, you know that when you're invoking hot news, you're in trouble. There's basically no hot news doctrine left. And that's really what the court said here. They looked here and they said, the public interest here recognizes that chess moves are not creative. There's only so many you can have. It's an 8x8 board. there's a long-standing principle that you simply cannot copyright the facts of what happens at a competition or an athletic performance. And so, case dismissed. But to us, this sort of highlights an interesting problem, because while we recognize that maybe chess moves are not copyrightable because there's only so many of them, and reporting that the piece moved from here to here, or maybe that a footballer took a penalty shot at 15 minutes in and went high and right, that's just reporting the facts of the day. There's no copyright in that. But as we'll see, in esports, you're able to report at a much finer level. You're able to report at a millisecond by millisecond exactly what happened, to the point that that information is usable to recreate the exact performance, including what we think are expressive elements. Now, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, I wanted to quickly talk through how replays and input streaming works. So in non-deterministic random gameplay, games that have random elements, you might get a different result every time. If you press the same exact sequence of buttons, well, at some point, a random number is going to be generated, and you're going to get a different result. There's no such thing as input streaming in this, because there's no point. You'll get a different result. But game designers have designed their games such that, well, game designers that are interested in supporting input streaming and replay saves have designed their games to sort of eliminate the strict randomness, and perhaps it still has the appearance of randomness, but if you're going to support this sort of recording, you need to eliminate randomness such that the same input given to different game clients will give you the same result. Now, we don't mean exactly the same result, and we are more concerned with the visual reproduction. You might have some variance based on where the viewer has put their camera, or maybe the different graphical settings, but at the heart of it, you are viewing the same game. You're viewing the same movements. Now, the way that this is accomplished is that the game clients are designed to record every input. So they might say the mouse click was here at this XYZ, and then here and here and here, and it's all recorded so they can be played back. It's not necessarily always recordings of mouse and keystrokes. It could be the data and control packets that the game has corresponding to that, but either way, it's input data that can be then played back by your client or another client. So in an esports context or in a live streaming context, your game as the player is generating this input, and it's serving it up through a server, and it's being fed into other players' game clients so they can watch along and they can follow everything you do. And so the analogy that we look at here is it's a little bit like a player piano. Now, it's an amazing player piano, a video game. It has graphics and special effects and a lot of really advanced code behind it, but still, it's the sort of thing where you put the copyrightable input in and you get out a copyrightable expression. And so one of the things that we explore in the paper, and one of the reasons why we think there might be some copyrightable expression here, is that in the context of player pianos, at least in the United States, they have recognized that these compositions in the player piano rolls, they do relate to the music themselves and not the player piano. So the courts have recognized that you can separate out this input file, the player piano roll, or as we argue, the input stream, and sort of divorce it from the player, the player piano, or perhaps the game. So looking at this input data, is it copyright eligible? Now, there's sort of three main points as to whether or not something is copyright eligible. Is it original, is it creative, and is it fixed? Now, looking at whether or not it's original, this is a very low bar. I think with video games, it's it's easy to argue that it's original. I mean, we've seen with Mia's talk, there's a lot of creativity that these players are putting into their games. Now, one of the questions becomes, is it, as the next topic, is it creative? And this ends up being the real sticking point, and where I expect some people might disagree with the positions that we take. Is gameplay creative, or is it merely responsive and functional? Are you always just trying to take the most optimal route, reacting to what's going on? And I think the answer is most of the time, but not always. I think there's a lot of arbitrary stuff that happens in games. Games are supposed to be fun, and so people have fun with them, and they'll do arbitrary things. They'll run their character in a circle for no reason, or some players that are well known for doing certain things. Maybe they'll do all their mouse clicks in the shape of a heart that has no actual gameplay purpose, but is part of their creative expression. And as we've seen in the context of people that follow esports and the context of people that follow players, is appreciated by their audience and by their fans. And so this creative expression, however minimal, does provide recognized value as expression to the audience. So we saw a lot of analogs here. So it's perhaps doing one special move, perhaps 15 seconds of gameplay. Maybe that's not creative enough. Or maybe it's strictly functional in nature. You're a really awesome player, and you know that every time this situation occurs, you click here, here, and here, and press A, and that's the best response. We don't argue that there's any copyright there. We think the input stream as a whole, and in particular the file, the capture of the input, is subject to some sort of copyright protection as a recording or fixation of the creative choices made by the player. We don't, however, argue that any sort of copyright there would extend to the completed display of the game. We recognize that the game developer owns a superior copyright, a stronger copyright in the visual output. They own a copyright in the graphic assets and the sounds and the user interface of the game. But we think there's a solid legal argument and indeed some benefits to be obtained from recognizing potential copyright protection in the input stream itself. Looking at fixation, again, like originality, we think that this one is a little bit easier of a call. I think you might argue that perhaps the stream of input is not a full fixation of the work because it requires this playback, and that's simply not the case under US law. There's recognition that fixation need not be perfect. Indeed, in choreography, it's more or less impossible to recapture the entire performance. And so courts have long recognized that copyright can lie in dance notation and that sort of thing. So if you buy that there's copyright in these data streams, I think that it will provide certain benefits. So why might we want to recognize benefits here? And I think the key benefit is to protect and encourage third-party leagues. Now, if we didn't recognize that, say, World Chess or Chess24, now, I don't think there's copyright in chess moves, but let's say ESL versus another third-party Dota league. If we don't recognize the copyright and it allows somebody to just come in and pirate the stream, it's going to become a lot harder for ESL to make money and continue on as an organization. And so recognizing this copyright will allow them to compete. It will allow them to stay in business, and I think it will foster a really diverse and valuable esports community. And I think that we have seen from the earliest days, now we're seeing game developers want to control, they want to run the esports, they want to encourage it. But back in the earliest days of esports, for me, I'm a big StarCraft fan. StarCraft took off despite Blizzard. In Korea, I believe it's the GSL, the Global Star League, they were the genesis of really taking it to the next level, to the point where Korean stadiums were being sold out with leagues without anything but a blessing from Blizzard. And so I think there's a lot of value in encouraging the growth of these third-party leagues. Another benefit here is sort of clarifying how this data might be used. And to that, we see a couple different angles. One question that arises is, if you recognize this copyright, what's really the value of it? It's really only useful in the context of the game. And while that's generally true, you could see the opportunity for other tools that don't infringe the copyright of the game holder, but might and perhaps should infringe the copyright of the players. For example, you could have a heat map after the game that parses the replay file and generates a simple two-dimensional image that doesn't use any of the game's assets, but shows you where all the kills and everything happen in the game. Now, perhaps there's a fair use argument or such there, but we think you could get to the point where that does misappropriate some of the value. Or even in a hypothetical scenario that seems quite difficult, you could create your own game that is functional to replay exact Dota 2 input and generate sort of the same output just without using the copyrightable assets, none of the art or graphics. So we think there is some value there as well. And frankly, we don't see it as being groundbreaking to really to recognize this. One of the questions we sort of tackled in drafting this paper and assessing this topic was, are we actually advocating for anything new? Or does copyright law currently recognize this? And we think there's a good argument that current copyright law allows and recognizes this. And then I think I might have already gone into this one, but again, the input streaming, by recognizing the player's rights in it, it gives the player control over it. And the player can assign those rights, the player can grant those rights, and it will allow these companies better use of it. And I think one of the keys here, because I know I'm speaking to a conference of game developers and their lawyers, is that we're not attempting to erode any rights that game companies have. I think game companies have a very substantial bundle of rights in their games and the displays that they generate. Adding to that bundle of rights the inherent right to the input streams doesn't really move the needle for a game company. You still can't do very much with that input stream without the game company's blessing in their copyrights. But giving this small right to players, I think, makes a huge impact to the players in the third-party leagues, which is, one reason why we sort of advocate recognizing this right. So that's sort of the summary of our paper. You can look for our paper in the forthcoming initial journal. I believe we're targeting June for publication. One of the things that we wanted to encourage with the journal is we've got such a great international crowd in here. I gave the US perspective. I'm sure there's another US perspective, but more important, there's this entire global copyright regime that we live and breathe in. And I know from talking to a lot of you at the happy hours and the dinners, and indeed in preparing this paper, that global law varies a lot on this, and we might get a different result in different countries. So what I would welcome from anybody today or in future issues of the journal is we want to hear. I think this is an interesting problem, and I wonder how it ends up in other parts of the world. But with that, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have a few minutes for questions. I'd like to exercise my prerogative and ask one question to each of you, and then open it up. But interestingly, to me, Scott, the temptation, because I agree with a lot of what you say from a copyright perspective, but it's going to be my experience as a sports executive that I'm going to bring to this as I was watching you. So it's been long accepted that a sports move by an athlete, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's skyhook, is in no way protectable through intellectual property. We've had a few test cases. We've had a lot of things that we don't know if they're real or apocryphal. But one of the reasons for that is because it's actually cool when other athletes imitate or use. If you're a hockey fan, I worked in hockey, the spinorama move or other particular moves. Do you worry, not from an IP perspective, but do you worry that preventing other players from imitating the first player who owns the IP in their move could somehow undermine the actual sport in esport?
Yeah, I think that's a significant worry, and that if copyright did have that effect, it would be a negative. That's one of the reasons why we see it as a extremely limited right in sort of the overall strict copying. Copyright has always sort of recognized degrees of copying in terms of infringement analysis, and when I think of something like the skyhook, or I'll tie it back to video games. In Smash Brothers, there are certain arbitrary moves you can do, like if you've got two Luigis, you can uppercut each other forever. Little things like that I don't see as being subject to copyright. you could invite another panelist up here to weigh in on whether or not that's a trademark issue. But I don't think copyright is going to extend to sort of small pieces of the expression like that. I think really we're talking about a limited recognition of right in an entire work.
Awesome. Thank you. Mia, so another part of my life, I started a TV station, and it was the only time I left law for about 3.5 years. And when I looked at what the streamers were doing, it sort of reminded me of small town TV, like a cooking show or something like that. And as I watched your presentation, I sort of saw the evolution of sophistication and almost saw it in traditional media terms. And I'm just wondering whether you're mapping any of your research to kind of traditional media research around celebrity or any other theories in particular.
I think that the research that's been done on influencers and influencer culture online has been useful. When I started the project, I actually used Terry Sent's book about cam girls, because what they were doing in the 90s is very similar. I mean, there were cameras that were downloading photos. It wasn't like live stream video, but they were, also they had for free, but then they could monetize it so that you got more, either access to more cameras, or like they had like diaries that they would update, or they would, interact in certain, they would have chat sessions like for subscribers. And, you also saw with cam girls, like different shticks, like, different themes that they would try out, or different personalities. So that's something that we were definitely,
and
thinking
variety
of.
show stuff. Like
Yeah.
I really see reflections of old media, but using the interactivity. I mean, we've had interactivity in
Right.
broadcasting since, we still do, talk shows on
Sure.
radio.
A lot of these streams look like call-in shows, especially like that bonding time. So many of them, like I said, will have the stream go for an hour before the game actually starts, because they're talking with people. And sometimes it's just, hey, what's going on? What are you doing, chat? And other times they're talking about like racial politics or game design. It really varies by the person, but it's like having 1,000 different variety TV shows, to choose from.
Thanks. Questions from the audience? Sir.
Question towards Scott. So I assume you could just comment on here what it is, on why the input wouldn't be a derivative work.
Yeah, so for the record, the question was why wouldn't the input itself be a derivative work? So this is one area where in the paper we address this, and part of what we say is we just disagree with some of the case law. There's a case that I had discussed a lot with Ross, the Microstar versus FormGen case, which is about right. Yeah. So in that case, you had custom maps that were deemed a derivative of Doom, and I respectfully disagree with that necessarily being a derivative work. I think there is some content there that's expressive absent the original work. And I'll look at the input streams and I see a lot of the same thing. I mean, not to flatter the chair too much, but looking at the quote earlier from how games are systems that we pour ourselves into, a lot of the expression that happens in these games is coming from the players. So I look at the work and try to determine what's the expression, and I see some value there. I'm still left with, yes, the visual and audio displays that are generated are themselves derivative works. But if I look at the input streams themselves, I think that you can argue that, well, maybe they aren't derivative works, or maybe they're authorized derivative works. It's similar to, I can write a paper in Microsoft Word. It's not itself a derivative work of Microsoft Word. I know that's not a flawless legal analysis, but I think it's an area where there's value to be gained in not looking at them as derivative works. And so while I cannot say definitively that they're not derivative works, I think there's an argument that they're not. Yep.
One follow-up, because we've got other people.
But Microsoft WordPad, there was actually a lot more creative expression in the levels that were designed by the players. And the court really didn't even argue or
Yeah. So just to repeat, so the replay maps certainly seem a lot, or I'm sorry, custom maps certainly seem a lot more creative than gameplay. And I would definitely agree. I think one of the issues that was sort of first and foremost in MicroStar was that the maps were new content for the game. They were supplanting, they were replacing or augmenting content of the game, whereas I think the input streams are sort of separate. And so I think there might be a hook there. I certainly agree that custom maps do feel like a much more creative expression, but if you're looking for a hook to distinguish why custom maps were derivative works and input streams were not, I think the best I can give you is that custom maps were additional content for the game, whereas the input stream is more a performance of the player, and it happens to be funneled through the game. And it's admittedly the tight point of the analysis.
Also, it's the FormGen case is a very tough case where levels were taken without the player's permission. And therefore, the court was going to have a real tough time with it. And I think they relied on what they could rely on. And just so that you didn't flatter me, you flattered Bruce Boyden, who deserves every bit of flattery possible. Any other questions?
Which is based in Russia, the esports company, and which is doing tournaments and actually monetizing this gamers content which they produce, and the content which produce like new esports journalists, so-called. And the issue is that once you start to make a business out of it, you definitely need to get special permission from the publisher to monetize and to sell advertisement in this kind of streams and so on. And how this differs from this gamers input rights, which you named.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, and I think the truth is the publisher here does have all the cards. The game developer, the rights holder in the game, they get to make the calls as to who gets to stream the video of the game, because all the displays that the game is generating, those are derivative works. I've no problem concluding that. I think the problem becomes more interesting, and this is one of the reasons why the chess case is what sort of teed this off, is that there was no rights holder there. There was nobody to come in and say, well, hey, chess is ours. Instead, it was third party against third party. So I still think that the game company gets to come in and play kingmaker and rulemaker. They certainly, Valve was within their rights to revoke ESL's permission to stream their game and to organize Dota 2 tournaments. But I think that ESL might have had a very limited right. And to be clear, I think the players had a very limited copyright that they probably assigned to the league. And so I do think ESL had a extremely limited right that they could have asserted against the people that were streaming their game online, but they have to answer to Valve. And Valve made their position very clear.
I know for sure that ESL, they have this license from Valve, because I was dealing with them, and they obtained special license for tournaments and for all streamings based on the gameplay, based on the game. I mean, like Counter-Strike and Dota.
Right. So I mean, and that right came with a lot of terms, and I'm sure a lot of copyright terms. So again, Valve is kingmaker.
Any last two questions, one here and one in the back. So you go first.
So we've talked about sort of third-party leagues and all this sort of stuff. I know Nintendo have clamped down on their streaming very much and say, if you want to stream our game, even if you're streaming to one viewer, you have to put Nintendo adverts, you have to make a kickback to us. I haven't checked the standard terms, but I would have thought that they would have said, yeah, any copyright that you generate, you're assigning to us straight away. Do you think we'll see a trend in other developers starting to do that as well, to where if we have got a copyright, we're not going to be able to use it anyway?
So I think that's certainly the situation, and we're seeing a couple trends here. So Nintendo is a little bit notorious for being an aggressive rights enforcer. They were a little bit slow to come on board the streaming train. A lot of companies have begun to look at streaming as, I think somebody mentioned earlier today, it's free advertising. So companies are having very permissive attitudes towards streaming, but again, the games right holder, Valve, Nintendo, whoever, they still have the copyright in the visual displays. They have the copyright in the game. And so if they want to step in, they can. And so, yes, it's an extremely weak copyright, and it really is only going to have value in sort of this third-party versus third-party situation. So, yeah, the superior rights holder here is definitely the game company, because the input streams simply don't do much without their blessing. I mean, as we discussed in the talk, there are third-party tools that don't infringe the game company's copyright, but we think might infringe the input stream copyright.
Last question in the back.
Bring things back a little bit to when you raised the problem at the start about how essentially people were piggybacking off of the in-game client's own ability to watch the games and then stream themselves directly. As much as I think this is a really good solution for it, if I may play devil's advocate just for a moment, I think one potential challenge to doing something like this might be the question of fair use. Specifically when you look at, I mean, you've mentioned him earlier, Admiral Bulldog and other streamers like him, like Wei Sing, who constantly, I mean, Wei Sing literally yesterday posted up a stream calling it free content, and it was just him watching the stream. And they're undeniably popular, and they have a big following, and they are providing commentary of some kind, whether or not it's an insightful one, a journalistic one, or one that's more like a parody or a satire of sorts. And I think in that respect, it might become difficult to still prevent third-party streamers like them from still, streaming the event itself and still eventually taking away viewers from that. Or do you think there might be another way to deal with that? Or
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, no, that's a really great point. That's something that always comes up in the copyright context is where's the fair use line? And fair use is one of those doctrines where it's very fuzzy, and we try to use it to fix a lot of things. I think the question there comes down to what is the expression, what is the value of the allegedly fair use. If you are adding a lot of really valuable commentary, then I think that's going to weigh in favor of it. But if people are really tuning into your stream because they wanted to watch that tournament and the draw there, I think that's going to cut against it. So there certainly is room to argue fair use, but I think whenever you're in that zone of fair use, you're sort of battling uphill.
So I'm going to ask one last question to Mia, but sort of tying these things together. Have there been video game companies who own the rights that the streamers are streaming their game, who have had a problem with what the streamers were doing and tried to control their activities in some way, or ask them to cease using their games, and what does that look like?
Right.
Has that come up in your research?
Yes. So, well, interestingly, I think it was Persona 5 launched last summer, and this is especially a problem with games with extended stories. Some of the developers don't like it when streamers stream the entire game, and they want the mystery preserved, and they initially told streamers you can only stream, I forget if it was like a number of the first few chapters or the first 2 hours or something, and then you have to stop, streaming, and streamers pushed back, and they eventually, I think, walked it back.
So the common denominator being that you would both agree on is that the game companies are ruling the roost on copyright at the end of the day and can enforce it.
But the streamers, no, I think at the end, the streamers did push forward, and the company itself kind of backtracked a bit.
Really?
Yeah. Okay. We could double check and
No,
and
I'm
go
not
back.
doubting it at all.
But I think it was because there was enough resistance to it. And I've talked with game developers themselves, some who would say like, I'm told I have to get my game in front of the streamers or I won't make any money. Like this is the way that you sell them now. These are small indies, and then they say I get them in front of them and there's no appreciable sales difference. So I think you could, for that argument, it would say, there's no mystery being lost. Like people aren't,
Yes.
buying or not buying based on simply seeing the game being streamed.
No, and there is this fair use argument that,
Yeah.
that cuts both ways.
So perhaps it's the fans that are in charge.
Let's hope. That would be a good thing. On that note, thank you, fans, for listening to us for the last hour and 15 minutes. And let's express our appreciation to Scott and Mia.